Hi lovelies, it's MLP with Lovely Lulu Designs, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you how to make this three-way split Fallen Monarch Damask Peek-A-Boo tumbler. This split style is based on the Boujee Baby tumbler, coined as such and popularized by Jessica Flynn of Flynn Sisters Boutique, but as always I did try to put my own unique spin on it. I will be providing you with links to any supplies I used in the description section below, including the Skull Damask SVG file, which can be found on my Etsy shop, Lovely Lulu Designs, all one word. All glitters, Micas, sealers, and even epoxy are from Cat Glitter Factory and will be linked down below as well. Without any further ado, let's get started. You're going to be starting this by using a fully prepped tumbler. So what that means is you're going to want to have one that has been sanded and primed. Then you can section the tumbler like what I'm going to be doing right now, or if you want, you can paint one of your colors first, then section it, and then just tape off and do the other color later. But to save spray paint on my colors, I have tons of primer, I don't have tons of color. I do the white first, and then I'm only going to spray paint the color where that color goes to kind of save a little bit of my paint. So when you're sectioning your tumblers, so just so you can see here, it's going to be in the three different sections. So I'm going to have my top section, which is going to be my Damask Peek-A-Boo, my middle band, which has a chunky glitter mix, and then my bottom, which I did a marble for. So I want to have consistency across my tumblers, not only for being able to use the same pattern on design, but also because it looks nice having the same tumblers or having the same kind of levels when I'm lining my tumblers up together. So one of the things that you can do, which is what I do, is I just stack certain containers until I have the heights that I want. One of the tips that I saw was shared by a member of Flynn Sisters Boutique, where she talked about stacking Lego to kind of get the heights that you like, and that was an awesome tip. However, I don't have any Lego with me that really kind of works for what I wanted to do. My sons hoard it, so I am just going to be stacking some containers that I have that work really well. I like the height difference for this, and I've just sort of committed to memory which containers I use for what. Now, at this stage, because I still have to paint my two different colors, these two colors are going to have the same base coat with how I've done mine. So I didn't need to line off or to mark off my top line, but I just want to show you just sort of what it looked like when it was marked off together like that. On my next one, I'm not going to be tracing out the top line. I'm just going to start with the bottom line because that's the line that I need to tape off. And the reason why we're doing this is to make sure that we're getting an even line when we're taping, so we don't have it all slanted and crooked, and so it looks good. So I'm just going to take my containers, sorry, I'm doing the bottom line, my containers and a pencil. I will just lay it here like so, and I am going to just turn my tumbler while holding my pencil steady. And that's how I'm going to get that first mark. It doesn't really matter, this is more visual, how high you want to do this. However, I do have a damask print in my Etsy shop that you can use if you'd like. I've already sort of measured it for a 30-ounce tumbler. There's also the individual, so the file where it's, you know, all of these, and then I also have just the individual file. It's not this exact damask print. I did do one slightly different that I had digital end product rights to, as long as I had made it myself. So I did that. I sort of took some elements from a few that I had rights to, and then I added the skull in the center. So it's not exactly this file. You'll see it as I get further and closer. We're going to show you the file that I'm going to be working with. But for now, I'm just doing, so for now, what I wanted to just explain was that if you want to use my file, it is set up for 5 inches between this line and this line. I think it's actually like 5.1 inches, so it gives you a little bit of a wiggle room there. So if you are measuring and you want to use that file, you would need to find something that would give you about 5 inches from here to here. So the way I would do that if you were looking for something is I would take a measuring tape, I would mark off 5 inches on my tumbler. And then from there, I would sort of stack a couple things, either Lego or something else that you have in your shop. And then once you get to the line that you think is good, you can then just use that to sort of trace your line around. So this here is my line. The next thing that I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to tape it. So I'm going to start by taping my colored section first. And I like to use painter's tape because it's less flexible. It's more rigid here, so it's easier to get a straight line. If you're using something like electrical tape for this, it's very flexible, so it's a lot harder to get your straight line when you're doing this. And I'm just going to place it down, and I'm actually going to, I prefer to work off the roll. And I'm just going to take my tape, and I'm going to line it up to that line. And I'm just going to tape around following that line. And then I would take a little bit of saran wrap just to kind of block off this part here, and I'm going to spray paint my tumbler. I'm going to be doing 2. I'm probably only going to be showing you 1, but I might flip back and forth depending on how they're going. So one of my tumblers is going to be with a purple background, and the other tumbler is going to be with more of a teal background. So the paints that I'm going to be using for the 1 cup is going to be Iced Lilac from Premier, which is available at Canadian Tire. My other one I'm going to be using is going to be Seaside by Rust-Oleum. So I'm not going to show you guys actually spray painting them. I'm going to just skip that part, but I will show you what I'm going to be doing next. Okay, so now that the paint has fully hardened, I can move on to my next step, which is going to be to move my tape line so I can paint the bottom part here, the back color for my marble, which in this case is going to be black, and I can also sketch out my top line for the band section as well. So I'm going to start by sketching the line. So I'm taking my taller of the 2 towers that I made for my pencil. Just as before, I'm going to put my pencil on top. I'm going to put the cup up around it, and I am just going to turn my cup while holding my pencil firm and line my tumbler. So it's subtle, but it is there. You might not be able to see it in the light, but it is there. If you have a paint color where your pencil is not showing, you can use a marker or a paint pen or something with a fine tip to do that line for you as well. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to peel my masking tape or my painter's tape off, and then I'm going to place this down. And using my same piece of tape, I'm just going to mask it from the other direction. And now I'm just going to follow that line. Your lines don't have to be 100% matchy-matchy perfect. If you have a little bit of white showing, that's not going to be a problem, because at the end of the day we are going to be putting the bands around here to separate the sections. So that does give you just a little bit of playroom. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my paint area. I'm going to use some clear, what do you call it, plastic wrap, and I'm going to cover this part of my tumbler, and then I'm going to paint the bottom part black on both of them. This one here is the purple one, so that's where I am. I'm at the same point for both of these tumblers. We're back for our next step, which is going to be, so let me show you, glittering and marbling. So we're just going to be using the finer glitter on this, and then we're going to be marbling the bottom, leaving the middle band still with just the base paint. So to do that, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to pull off another piece of painter's tape. So when I finished spraying this one, I left my black, I left the painter's tape right above the black section that I had just painted. I did not remove that. And that way I'm going to have the same line. And then now, yep, I'm just going to take a piece of tape and I'm going to tape off following that line that we made with the pencil mark, just going around the tumbler. All right. So I've already mixed up, I just mixed up 30 milliliters of epoxy for this. So for the first part, the top part here, usually I would warm my cup first just to make the epoxy spread a little bit more smoothly and evenly, but I'm not going to do that today. So I'm just going to, because we're just applying glitter using the epoxy method, you're just going to take small amounts of epoxy and very, very thinly spread it over the tumbler. You are just looking to put enough on to make like an adhesive layer for your glitter to stick to. You don't want it to be too thick, because if you have it too thick, you're going to get what's going to look like kind of like wet spots, or it's going to start running on you. You don't want that. You don't want it to be too thin, because if it's too thin, it's going to start pulling away from your backing paint, your background paint, and then you're going to have holes in your glitter, which isn't terrible at the end of the day, because you can always do a second coat, but one coat is always easier than two, so that's kind of the goal. Okay, now I'm just going to put my epoxy to the side. And I'm going to place a piece of parchment paper below my cup to catch my glitter. And I mentioned this in a previous video, and the reason why I applied the epoxy before I put my parchment paper down is because if I drip epoxy onto my parchment paper, when I put the glitter on the cup and the glitter falls onto the parchment paper, it's going to adhere to the epoxy that dripped, and then it's going to be harder to get it off. And I'm going to be using Wild Mauve from Cat Glitter Factory, an extra fine, for the top part. I'm just going to be sprinkling it all over the tumbler. This is a metallic glitter. It is an opaque coverage. Now what I'm going to do, so I don't forget to do it later, is I'm just going to remove that tape. And there we go. You don't want to forget to remove that, because if the epoxy cures with the tape still on, you're going to have a heck of a time getting it off and getting your nice clean line. I'm going to grab a clean glove. And if you'll notice, I've still left that bottom piece of tape. And you'll also notice that the other piece of tape I laid on top of that bottom piece, and that was the order of how I glittered things. The reason why I glitter the top section before I do the marbling on the bottom is because if I have the marbling on the bottom done, it's going to have wet epoxy. And then if I accidentally have some of the glitter from here get onto the bottom, it's going to stick to it and it could ruin my design effect that I've done there on the bottom. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my epoxy again, and I'm going to apply a layer of it. So for this layer, it's going to be thicker than the top one that we just did. It's not going to be crazy thick. I don't want it running all over the place, but I do want it to be thick enough that I do get some flow and movement. So I'm just going to grab my torch and I'm going to very quickly I'm going to wipe my glove first, and then I'm going to very quickly torch that to get out any of those micro bubbles. The reason why I'm torching that right now is because when you torch it, obviously the epoxy heats up. When it heats up, it gets more fluid and runny, and I don't want it to really affect too much the design elements I'm about to be adding to this, so I'm going to let that cool just a little bit while I locate my epoxy again. Here it is, and I'm going to mix up just a couple little batches of some colors. So for this marble, I'm going to be using the purple epoxy pearl pigment armor art from CCDIY. I'm going to be using the black epoxy pigment armor art from CCDIY. And I'm going to be using, this is the purple Chameleon from Cat Glitter Factory. All of these colors are from Cat Glitter Factory, so if you're looking for them, I've mentioned it before, it is still true that at this point in time, Cat Glitter Factory is the sole distributor for CCDIY products. You know what? This is just a little bit darker than what I want. So what I'm also going to do is I'm going to add a tiny bit of light violet from Artist Loft in my mixture as well. So that's the color that I'm mixing up right there. And that paint I just got from Micas. And that's the black that I'm just mixing up right now. And then I just use these little stool samples. They come with a little spoon, and I kind of just scoop that into my epoxy. And I am going to use a pretty fair amount to get some good coverage. So now that my colors are mixed, I'm ready to get started on actually marbling the bottom. So this is based on the Nikki marble where I originally saw this. I can't remember what group it was in, but it is based on the Nikki marble. That's sort of where I started my marbling. I do it a little bit different, but essentially the same kind of idea. Don't forget your bottoms. So I'm just adding kind of sporadically here and there. When I need more pigment, I add it to my glove, but you can also kind of just hit it with little bits where you don't really have much on your glove anymore, just to kind of give it a little pop of color here and there. And now I'm going to add Chameleon purple, which you can see it's so sparkly and so pretty. This is one of my absolute favorite pigments, or sorry, Chameleon powders from Cat. I use it whenever I get the chance. You can layer it in color. And this here is the part that kind of gives it the look that I'm sort of, I go for, the look that I really love. So I take black, put it on my finger, and I add it to the tumbler, and I kind of swirl it around the colors, being sure to pick up some of the color as I'm swirling it so that it goes into the swirl. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of my wild mauve and I'm going to add it into the Chameleon, the purple Chameleon pigment powder match that I mixed up. So that's basically what it looks like. And I'm just using, I'm going back and forth and using kind of just a silicone stir stick to kind of mix that in, and then I'm just wiping it off with a paper towel, or if you have one, like a lint-free disposable cloth. You can get those at like auto shop part places and those sort of places. It's usually where I get mine. Now I'm going to use this piece here, which was, it's a dotting tool, a silicone dotting tool that I got off of Amazon. And I'm going to use that to just kind of take this and drag some glittery elements to it. Now, last but not least, I'm going to take a little bit of the chunky mix that I made custom that I'm going to be adding to the center part. And I'm just going to be sprinkling a small, thin amount in various locations. So this here is, I believe it is Wild Mauve Chunky. It could be Wisteria. I actually have to check the website. I'm not 100% sure. I didn't get a label for it. So, but it's one of their Cat Glitter Factory's lighter purples, and I mix it in with some MLP and some Black Hole. And then I'm just going to pick a couple little spots, just using my fingers, kind of pinch it on. And now I am going to let this continue to spin until it is fully dry. And also, do not forget to peel away your tape before the epoxy cures. And then there we go. So now we're going to be ready next to seal this with some clear coat, and then we're going to add our chunky to the middle band. Now my epoxy has fully dried, and I'm going to move on to my next step. But before I can do the middle band here with the chunky, what I want to do is I want to seal this, these two sections, mainly this section with the fine glitter, because that, you know, kind of like lifts still, but I'm going to seal both of them with some quick coat. So I'm just going to, or I guess that's the bottle there, quick coat. Again, this is from, this is a CCDIY product. Oh, my cap is kind of clogged. This is a CCDIY product, and in Canada that is sold exclusively from Cat Glitter Factory. I'm gonna have to clean my nozzle out, it's a little clogged. So before I seal it, basically what I do is I just take a brush. You can use a chip brush like this. You can use a fan brush like this, and just very lightly, I just brushed it off like so. You can see that still some is coming off. To apply the quick coat, I'm going to use a Taklon brush to help reduce or eliminate brush strokes. I'm going to start by doing the bottom part, and the reason why I'm going to start with the bottom part is because there's not really any loose extra fine glitter on it. The glitter that's on here was either pre-mixed into epoxy, or it was the chunky glitter, which is really stuck on there. It's not really going to come off, but I want to make sure that I'm sealing it before I tape it off, just so I get a better, easier adhesion with my painter's tape. So that's that part there. Now I'm going to do my raw glitter, and I'm going to come back in, and I'm probably not going to worry about a second coat on the marble part, but I am going to do a second coat of the quick coat on the raw glitter here, the extra fine or fine glitter that I have, just to make sure that I've got it totally sealed down, and it's going to again make it just a lot easier for my tape to stick when I'm going to be putting this, the tape on to section off this middle bar here. You're going to notice when you're first putting quick coat on raw glitter like this, you're going to need more than you would on, say, a second coat, and that's just because the raw glitter is just going to suck up that quick coat quite a bit. It's just going to pull it in, so you're going to need more than what you would usually use on a second coat. All right, so I'm going to put my brush in a plastic bag, and I'm going to seal that up so then that way my brush doesn't dry out. Quick coat does dry pretty quickly, and it will ruin your brushes if you don't clean it off with warm soapy water and then rinse really, really well. So I'm not going to show you guys the second coat of quick coat because it's just more of the same, but I will come back in and show you guys when I'm taping off the next section and sort of how I apply that. Where I am right now with this tumbler is I put the second coat of quick coat on the glitter section. I didn't need to put a second coat on the marble section, only on the glitter section to really make sure that the glitter is sealed down, it's not going to shift on me, but also to allow my tape to stick to it. Now I say it sticks to it, but it sticks to it very lightly. It's going to be very easy to remove. So you want to keep that in mind when you are applying your epoxy or whatever other adhesive you're going to use for this section. You don't want to be like really pulling back on the tape here because it's not a perfect seal. So when I'm taping this, it's going to be a lot better of a seal on the bottom section on this marble area. This is a smoother, flatter surface. So I'm going to work sort of this way and then this way with that. So just to show you guys, I've done it on this one now. Now I've only done one coat of chunky. For these, I like to do 2 coats of chunky because I find it gives you a lot of depth. I did it before, like where what I did instead was rather than just glittering the top part and leaving that band, I glittered from the marbled section all the way up and then just did 1 coat of chunky, and it looks lovely. It's very, very nice. But I personally like the depth of just the two layers or coats of the chunky glitter on here. So that's a decision that you can make. I should have mentioned that earlier. That's a decision that you can make when you're taping it off. You can easily, you know, just from here, do the full glitter from your marble all the way to the lip of your cup. And then later you'd have to apply a coat of epoxy so you can mark off your line the same way that we did before, but using a marker, something that would show up on the epoxy rather than a pencil. But again, I like that the depth of 2 layers of the chunky glitter. So that's what I'm going to be doing here. So again, I'm using the epoxy method, and I'm going to move my parchment paper out of the way so in case I drip, I'm not dripping on top. And because I'm doing this in a chunky, what I want to do is I want to make sure that I'm not doing my epoxy as thin as I would on, say, a fine or extra fine coat of glitter that I'm doing, because I want to give it something where I'm going to be grabbing more epoxy into. So again, I'm being very careful with the edge of this piece of tape. I don't want to pull it back. I'm just kind of putting a little bit on my finger and then just bringing it around. All right, I'm going to deglove, move my epoxy out of the way, put my parchment down, grab my tumbler, and just do a glitter dump. Just dump her on. I'm just gonna tap it, knock off any excess. As I'm just going to also go around and kind of make sure there were no bald spots. If you do have a bald spot, I actually missed a spot on my last one. I just kind of go back in with my gloved finger and add a little bit of epoxy wherever I missed it, because it's all still wet, so it's still very movable. So that's not a big deal. Chunky is a lot more forgiving with all of its texture. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take just a small piece of parchment paper, and I'm just going to go around my tumbler, and using that parchment paper, I'm going to dab it down. You are not doing a rubbing motion. If you do a rubbing motion, you're just going to rub it right off. You just want to dab it down, and this is going to help lay your glitter flat to make it easier. My paper is kind of curled. Make it a little hard. And that will make it easier for your next steps when you're epoxying. And you also can see that when it sits flatter, it has a bit of a nicer look to it. It's not like jagged. All right, and once you're done that, you will immediately remove your tape. Do not forget this step. again, if your glitter hardens with your tape on it still, you're going to have a heck of a time getting it off and creating those smooth lines. So you see how much easier it came off of that glittered section? So that's it now. So as you can see, some of it lifted here and around the edges. That's okay because I'm putting another coat on here. So I'm not concerned about it. So once this has fully dried, I will go in with quick coat and seal just this middle section again. Once that, I'll do 2 coats of the quick coat, and then once that's sealed, I will tape it back off again and do a second coat of my glitter. I'm not going to show you guys that. You've seen now how we do it. You guys will next see me when I'm putting on a coat of epoxy on the entire tumbler. Since I've seen you, I applied the second coat of glitter, chunky glitter. Before I did that, I sealed the glitter coat that you saw me apply with quick coat. I did 2 coats of that. Then I applied, again using the epoxy method and taping this off, the second coat of chunky glitter. And then I applied 2 more coats of quick coat again just to this area because this was already sealed. And now this tumbler is ready for its first coat of epoxy. So before I can be laying my decals down to do the peek-a-boo with the stencil, I need to epoxy this section, like the whole tumbler, but especially this section here, until it is perfectly smooth. And the reason for that is because I cannot be sanding the epoxy and then spray painting it because you will see those little sand lines. So I'm using CCDIY, and I'm just going to I prefer to scoop and apply. I know lots of people like to pour. Personal preference, so I just sort of go around my tumbler starting on the extra fine raw glitter on the top. You don't have to, you can do it however you would prefer, but this is just my technique. Then I move into the lower 2 sections. Just spreading it out. I use the finger application method so I can feel what parts, if there's any parts that are standing up, I can feel if the epoxy is missing in an area because it sticks, it drags, or if I don't have enough in a certain section, it feels too thin. And of course, remember to do your bottoms. You don't want to add too much to your bottom because you don't want to risk it being a wobbly cup at the bottom later. So you're going to wipe that really well. And then I just go from top to bottom and just kind of smooth my coat, making sure I'm going all the way up to the lip of my tumbler. And I'm missing a section here. I would usually wait about 5 minutes to torch it, and I still am going to, but I'm going to torch it once now just so you guys can see it if you haven't seen my other videos yet, or you haven't seen my final coat for epoxy. I use the recommended torch head for CCDIY products, which is the Bernzomatic TS4000. CCDIY now has their own torch head as well that they are selling, which is pink, and it's really pretty, but I already bought this one. And this attaches to a propane just attached to like a propane tank. The reason for this type of torch rather than just your culinary kitchen torch is because CCDIY has a higher heat resistance than some of the other epoxies do. So in order to sort of penetrate the epoxy and get out those micro bubbles with the heat, you need to have a higher heat from your flame, and propane does burn higher than butane does. So I'm just going to light it. So my technique is I go very fast. I don't leave my heat any place for too long. I don't want to burn or singe my epoxy or my tumbler. Also, if you have too much heat, you can start getting dimples in your epoxy. In 5 minutes, I'm going to come back and I'm going to torch my tumbler again, just so any micro bubbles that maybe would have come to the surface after doing that initial torch will be easier to pop, and then that way I should have 0 micro bubbles in my finish. In about 3 hours, I'm going to come back and I'm going to do what's called a flood coat. If you're unfamiliar with a flood coat, with what a flood coat is, I do have a video on how I do that. Again, because I need this to be perfectly smooth before I spray paint. So I'm going to flood coat it once, maybe twice, because I need this to be perfectly smooth. So I will kind of do that assessment. So if I need to flood coat it twice, it would be one flood coat in 3 hours and then another flood coat 3 hours after that. So I'm home today. I will be babysitting these tumblers as they are turning, and I will come back to you guys, and I will probably next be showing you how I determined the size of my stencil and how I kind of made the stencil using the file that I have on Etsy. Okay, so what I ended up doing, in full disclosure, I kind of went back and thought about my plan again and was remembering that even with a flood coat, if I don't sand around the rim of a glittered cup, I tend to get kind of uneven coverage here. It's like a little bit bumpy on just right on the very rim. So what I ended up doing was I did the original coat of epoxy that I showed you, and then I did do one flood coat at the 3 hour mark. I let that fully harden before I came back in with some sandpaper. I did a very light sand over the rest of the tumbler, and just to kind of scuff it up a little bit. And then I took some 220 or 240 grit sandpaper, and I just kind of focused right on that rim right along here to kind of smooth out that edge. Then I did I cleaned the cup really, really well. Then I did a final, then I did a very thin coat of epoxy again, and another flood coat at 3 hours. And the reason why I do that flood coat is because for whatever reason, after I've sanded a tumbler, I can't seem to get all of the tiny little flecks that are on here, like I guess like the dust from the epoxy off of it. It doesn't seem to matter how many times I wash it with Dawn dish soap, if I let it air dry, if I dry it with a lint-free cloth. If I wipe it down with a lint-free cloth and acetone, there's always a couple spots here and there. I find that when I do a flood coat, it eliminates that. And because I'm coming in with some spray paint and a mask for a peekaboo on this, you're going to see any little tiny imperfection in that epoxy. So I get the best results on my coats when I do that flood coat. So that's why I did it that way. So before I get into how I would design if you wanted to use a decal other than the one that I used, I do have the one that I used for these up on my Etsy shop. So if you like that one and you want to go ahead with it, and you're doing it on a 30-ounce tumbler, then that you can just go ahead and use that. This is the skinny. Because this is a skinny and not a straight, there is a slight taper in this. So we're going to just kind of average out or kind of round our measurement for around here. But just to show you how you know what size you need, you take a fabric tape measure, one that is flexible, it bends, you can wrap it right around your tumbler. And what you're going to do is you're just going to take it, you're going to wrap it around your tumbler, and you're going to measure how far across your tumbler. So this is coming in just over 10 inches, but if I were to measure lower down because of the taper, it would be 10. If I were to measure up higher, it would be a little more than 10. So I'm going to average it to about 10 inches because I have more playroom with my sort of vertical where I can put them. But what I want to make sure that I get pretty accurate is going to be the distance from this band here to the top of my tumbler, which looks like it is 5 1/8. So this is basically what I'm going to be basing my artboard on, or I'm going to sort of show you online how I do it in case you want to use a different emblem or a different graphic. So I'm getting ready to cut my file, and I wanted to sort of show you first where I have the file. This file with the skull inset is on my Etsy shop, Lovely Lulu Designs. You can see here I have it as a featured item. If it's not on the featured item section because I changed that up, you can also find it under Tumbler Elements here. So I'm just going to click on this, and right now you can sort of see the default that I have. So this was the one that I made if you're going to be following along with my tutorial exactly. So that means you're going to be using a 30-ounce skinny, and you're going to be using, you're going to be measuring about 5 inches from the top part of your your middle band to the rim of your tumbler. For anyone who wants to be doing it on a different size or shape or style of tumbler, I'm also including in my listings just the single element, and I'm going to sort of show you how you can take the measurements that I showed you today and kind of adapt your to your own custom work. Right now I have the skull one. I know skulls aren't for everyone, so I am working on one as well that has a heart inset in the middle there instead. So it's slightly different, but it's basically the same idea. You can also use another type of damask or other type of style, you know, whatever it is that you prefer. So I'm going to go on to Design Space. I do most of my editing and my graphic design work on Illustrator, but I do recognize that that is a pretty expensive program, and most people aren't going to have that. And also, there's a pretty big learning curve to it. So just to make it easier for, I think, a lot of the viewers here, I don't have Silhouette software, so I can't show you there. But I'm just going to use the Design Space. So you're going to go and you're going to upload. And you're going to upload an image. You're going to browse. So if you've downloaded it and you have a PC and you've downloaded it from the internet, it's going to be likely in your downloads folder. For me, it's going to be under my Etsy listings. I think I just have it under Damask. That's the heart one I'm working on, but we're just going to look at the Skull Damask Etsy, which is right here. It is an SVG file. I did include it in a PNG as well. And I'm just going to select it and insert that image. So I have this here. Right now it's defaulted to about 4 inches tall. I think I made it at 4 inches, but it converts just slightly smaller than the 4. That's fine. Now what we need to do as well is I want to make, usually in Illustrator, just make an artboard, but I can't do that here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a square and I'm going to unlock it, and I'm going to set my width. So this was the width around the cup, and we had measured 10, if you remember. And the height we measured at about 5.1 inches tall. So that is basically the surface area of the top part of that tumbler where we're going to want to be laying this down. So I'm going to send this to the back by right-clicking on it and sending it to the back. And I also know that one of the things that I want to be doing is I want to be putting in 4 rows of my image. So what I'm going to do is, now I already know this because I have made this already, but I'm going to take 10 and I'm going to divide it by 4, and I'm going to find out that it's 2.5 inches. Breaks 10 up evenly into 4. So I'm going to take another square and I'm going to unlock it again, and I'm going to make the width 2.5 inches and the height 5.1 inches. Okay, and I'm going to make this a different color, just so it's a little bit easier for me to kind of keep track of what I have. And I'm going to take my damask print and I'm going to move that to the very front. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this 4 times. And this is just going to help me visually to sort of recognize and lay out my image. So that's duplicate, duplicate, and so I'm going to duplicate it 3 times. So I'm now just going to, again, take this guy here, and I'm going to send to front. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take all of these here, and I'm just going to align them center vertically. And I'm going to take individual squares. I guess you didn't have to do that. And I'm just going to kind of lay them out so that they're about one after the other. Okay, it doesn't have to be perfect. Now I'm going to align it center, and that's just for my OCD. So now what I'm going to do is, I know that I'm going to have 2 of the full ones in the center, and then I'm going to have 2 rows of the ones that are kind of cut off in the middle. So for purposes of this right now, I'm going to take my damask and I'm going to duplicate it. And I'm going to duplicate it again. So the first thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to take these 2 here, the square behind this one and my damask print, and I'm going to align it center vertically, so that way I know that this is centered correctly. And I'm going to take this one and I'm going to kind of figure out, oh, it's not going to let me, I have to move it down a bit. Figure out kind of how I like the positioning of how it looks compared to sort of where this is laid out here. So I want it to have a little bit of space between them. You're going to have a little bit of playroom in this when you're looking at your horizontal, like so these two here. When you're actually measuring out your cup, you know, it's not going to hurt if it's a little bit over this way, a little bit over this way. You're going to have a little bit more play on that. But I want to kind of try to design it so I'm seeing what it is that I'm going to be looking for to have a nice even pattern. And I'm kind of paying attention to where my cutoff is going to be on my designs and sort of the center of it. So I think that this is pretty nice for the distance from the two prints here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to group these guys together, and then I'm going to take it with the square behind it, and again, I'm going to align it center vertically. Okay, so this way I know this is the same as this here. And this looks pretty good. I like these ones here. So now I'm going to take this one, I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to bring this over here. I'm going to align these ones center horizontally and vertically, and I'm just going to kind of slide it back over to where it looks pretty good like that. And I'm going to move these back down. Oh, this didn't take. Align center vertically, and we're just going to move them down like this. So that looks pretty good to me. So now what I'm going to do is I need to cut off the top and bottom of this. So to make this easier for myself, I'm just going to take this group here, which is just this piece of damask here and this piece of damask here, and I'm going to weld those two together. And basically what that does is it makes it one object. Now I can kind of get rid of my guide. Whoops, don't do that. Get rid of my guide squares here and here. And using this large one here that's going to cover the entirety of the width of this design, I'm going to take this one and I am going to take my damask weld result, which says right here weld result, and I am going to slice this. And you're going to see that it's sliced off that part there. I can get rid of that part there. And I have two copies of this now as well. And this one here, just to make it so that it's all going to print on the same mat, I'm going to make it black. Okay, so this here gives me a pretty good idea. So you're going to see that it overhangs a little bit, but that's okay because if you look at it, it's like a puzzle. So this is going to be overhanging into this part here, and this part here is going to be overhanging into this section here. So it's okay to have that. So, oops, keep selecting the foreground one. Let's go over here and get rid of it. And then just for my own personal OCD, I can align center vertically. It's already aligned pretty good. And right there, that is how I did it. So you would just take the measurements that you made specifically for your piece, and you would just kind of do it that way. So that's how you make these. And when I make this, I use 631 vinyl, not 651. The reason why I use the 631 is because it is, first of all, it's cheaper than 651. Second of all, it is a temporary vinyl versus the permanent vinyl of the 651. So it's easier to remove from your tumbler. And that's what you're looking for. You're looking for something that's going to be easy to sort of pull off. So it's going to give you really clean lines. It's going to give you good adhesion when you want it. But when you don't need it anymore, you can easily peel it away. And that's why I use that. So because this is a bit of an intricate design as well, and I am doing it on 631, which is kind of like almost like a thinner vinyl, I really want to make sure that I'm using the washi tape setting for this, and I'll get better clean lines. And I'm also going to be reverse weeding it, which basically means that I'm going to take my unweeded project that's already been cut, put it on some transfer tape. I'm going to cut it out so that this will be one piece, this will be one piece, this will be one piece, and this will be one piece because it's going to be easier to lay it down. So I will show you guys that when we get there. And if you want, you're actually going to, in order to save your vinyl, what you can do is you can select it all and then attach it. And you're going to notice that when you attach it and you move it to your cutting mat, you can kind of do it you know, like where it's 12 across and only 5 inches, just over 5 inches from the top of your mat to the bottom of your design. If I don't attach it, when I go to make it on my paper, I'm going to be using a lot more vinyl. So that's another little tip for you there to kind of save on your vinyl. So I'm going to cut this now, and I'm going to reverse weed it, and then I'm going to start showing you guys how I section the tumbler so you lay these evenly on your tumbler. Yesterday was a long day of cutting and weeding decals, but our next step is ready to be done. They're all cut and weeded. So I'm now going to show you how I section the tumbler and how I sort of measure to lay down the damask elements on this to be used as a peekaboo. So I'm first laying down this temporary vinyl before I'm going to be spray painting it. So then that way when I remove the vinyl, you're going to see the glitter color from underneath. So the way that I section my tumblers is I use the lid. If you look closely at your lids, you will notice that there is a seam on them that dissects your lid perfectly in half. So when you put your lid on your tumbler, it will dissect your tumbler perfectly in half. I will use this every single time I am applying a decal to a tumbler that has a front design and a back design. It'll always center my design to the center part on this. So there's a little tip for you if you didn't know about that. For me, that's the easiest and fastest way to section a tumbler. But in this case, we're going to be needing it to be separated into 4 equal sections. So I'm going to start with my lid and kind of see, you know, do I like that to be sort of a side where I'm going to be having the decal? Yeah, it looks good. The marble's good everywhere. There's nowhere that I'm really concerned of or feel like I have to hide anything. So I'm going to take a Sharpie next, and I'm going to just mark right on my epoxy, my perfectly smooth, unsanded epoxy, right exactly where that seam line is. Usually I have better lights here, but when I have them on, it's hard for the camera to pick up the details of what I'm doing, so I'm trying my best to see this in this light. And I'm also going to try my best not to get my head in the shot, but these were a pain in the bum to weed, so I really need to make sure that I'm laying them straight because I don't want to have to redo them. So I'll do my best. So once I've marked it here on my epoxy, the next thing that I do is I actually bring that line up and over my rim. And my reason for doing this is because I'm going to be using a tape measure to measure around here, and I'm going to be blocking this line, but I'll still be able to see it on the rim. And later I'm going to be putting my lid back on, and then I'm going to be blocking the line on the rim, but I can still see it on the epoxy. So that's kind of how I do that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my fabric tape measure again. And again, you want it to be one of the fabric ones because they're flexible. And I'm going to, don't need this right now. I'm going to take it and I'm going to line up the 0 with one of my marks, and I'm going to follow my rim. And the reason why you kind of want to try to keep a bit of a straight line and follow the rim is because if you're kind of bringing it down and all around, you're going to be getting an incorrect measurement. So you want to try to be consistent and not adding extra slack to the tape measure. And I'm going to see it's about 5 1/8. So if you're like me and you're not particularly strong at math and you can't do fast fractions, what I do is I just take the 0 and I line it up to where I measured it at, and then I'm going to take my tape measure, I'm going to fold it in half, and I'm going to give it a really good crease with my thumbnail. And then I'm going to be able to lay this back, again putting my 0 at the 0 mark, and bringing this back around the top. And then I'm going to take my marker, and right where I made that crease, I'm going to mark on the rim. And then I'm going to bring that little mark, and I'm going to bring it back down onto the epoxy. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my lid, And I'm going to line it up, that seam on the lid up with my new mark. And then I'm going to just go find the seam on the other side of the tumbler, which is right here, right here. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to pop this off, and I'm going to bring it up here. So now I have separated my tumbler into 4 equal sections. You can keep going if you were doing a design that needed more. You could, you know, take your tape measurer and measure it from one spot to your next spot, and then do the same thing, fold it in half, crease it, and mark it, and then use your lid to get the other side. But we don't need to do that. We can stop here. We've got our 4 equal sections. Now what I'm going to do is on 2 of my sides, I'm going to take some rubbing alcohol, and I'm just going to wipe off the part that's on the epoxy, being careful not to wipe it off of the top of the rim. And the reason for that is because the way that my design is, if I don't rub that off, the mask is going to mask off that section, and then when I peel it away, you're going to see the black marker on the epoxy behind it. So we don't want to do that. So I had some technical difficulties when I was recording this, but luckily I filmed doing both tumblers. So I'm just going to kind of flip back and forth between the tumblers and pick whichever one had the best video quality for this section, because this is a pretty important section of the tutorial. So usually what I would do next is I would take my decal, and to find the center point of that, I would do the same thing that I just did with my measuring tape, and I would line up the edges of my design, and I would fold it, and then that would give me the center point of my design. However, this design, the way that it's made, I can tell just by the details where the center is. I designed this, I know exactly that everything is even on this. I know that this little diamond in the center, or the nose, or the point here, is in the center of the damask print. So I don't have to do that. I just have to make sure that I'm lining up my center here with my mark. I use the hinge method. You can use whatever method you find works for you. I kind of play around with mine a little bit the way I do it. If this doesn't work for you, don't worry about doing it this way. This is, again, just what works for me. I want to lay this down as one piece with the top and the bottom, so that way I don't have to measure out this being center with the bottom one. So that's kind of what I'm planning on doing here. Whoops. I forgot my first step. So I kind of go in behind my backing paper, and I sort of make some cuts on my backing paper before I even get started, to kind of prep to lay it down. So again, this is the 631 vinyl. It is the temporary vinyl. I'm going to try to keep my head out of this shot. Oh goodness. Taken on and off this backing paper so often. Doesn't want to hold anymore. So I'm going to try really hard to keep my head out of the shot, but these are kind of annoying to weed, so I want to make sure I'm laying it straight the first time round. So I really hope I don't block you. I'm going to try my best not to. So what I'm doing here to make sure that this is straight is I'm just going to line this top line up with the rim of my tumbler. And that's going to put that design straight on there then. And that looks good. And again, I do the hinge method. So I just pop this back, and then I lay that down there. And then I'm going to do the same here. I'm just going to pop it back, and I'm going to keep it kind of straight. Make sure I'm laying it straight. And when I apply, I don't just press my vinyl down. I kind of push to the side. So that way I'm pushing out any air, because I don't want air to get trapped in behind my vinyl and my tumbler. And then I can take this piece here, Now the reason why I start with this and not the full emblem is because this is going to be sitting in the center of these, so it's going to be easier for me to figure out the center of this when I have these ones laid down first. So that's why I do this, the cut ones first. So you're going to want to make sure that you push it down really, really well. And then when I peel back my transfer tape, I kind of pull it right along my tumbler, and I'm watching to make sure that I'm not having any pieces of vinyl pull up with the tape. Maybe they don't want to stay down. And I'm also looking for any bubbles or any creases where spray paint might get trapped underneath and kind of ruin my design. So there we go. And you can see that this design went just ever so slightly over the edge of my top line here for my middle band. That's not going to be a problem because, well, first of all, I'm going to be taping this whole piece here off, but second of all, I'm still going to be able to center it, and I'm going to be using vinyl as a band to go around this part. So again, we have that playroom where the sections meet. Okay, so those sides are the easier sides in terms of figuring out where to lay them, because you're just sort of following the top and bottom if you've measured properly. So now what I need to do is I need to place this where I'm lining up both the center of the flower to the mark that I made. I also want to make sure that I'm about equal from the top of the tumbler to the top line of my middle band, because that will put me center to this design. So I'm going to start with that measurement. Okay, and then once I've done that, I'm going to pick a spot on either side of my design, and I'm going to make sure that that spot is the same distance from the top of the rim to the start point of that design on both sides, because if it is not, then it is not straight. Okay, and this is good. Again, burnishing really well. Okay, and that's where we are now. And we're going to do one more on the other side. So now what you want to do is you want to commit your last two measurements to memory to try to make this as even on both sides as possible. So you're going to remember, kind of mark in your head where this one here was, and then where this one here was. So that part there is done now. Now all that I have left to do is I have to just put some painter's tape along the bottom line here, and then I can cover the bottom section with some saran wrap, and then I'm going to be spray painting this, and I'm going to be spray painting the top parts black. You want to make sure that you do not have any drips. So if you need to watch my tutorial, if you're not sure how to do that, or you have a hard time with drips, I'll link my tutorial here for spray painting a tumbler without getting any drips. And then once it is fully dry, I will show you a couple on camera of me peeling it away. But again, like, I kind of have to get it close to my face to really see what I'm doing. And I don't want to be having my head in the shot the whole time, because that's not what you guys want to see. You don't want to be seeing the top of my head. So I'll just kind of show you like one or two pieces and kind of give you some tips on what to look out for. But yeah, so I'll just put that tape on here now, cover it up with saran wrap, and paint it. You want to wait. First of all, you want to make sure you've got full coverage, no drips, and you also want to wait for it to dry before you start removing this. Do not touch your paint when it is tacky still, or try to handle it. Wait until it is fully hardened and dried. I usually wait about 2 hours. The reason for that is because if you get a fingerprint in it, you will see it. So you just want to make sure that you're really waiting. I thought I would show you first how they look like when they are done being painted. So I just used a flat black, actually I think I just used a primer, just black primer. And this is just sort of what it looks like. So you'll see that I have a secondary tape line. So I've got saran wrap here, which is protecting the bottom design so it didn't get any spray paint or overspray on it. But I also have another layer of painter's tape. So I use this layer to make sure that I have a seal on the top part of my saran wrap. That is totally unnecessary. The reason why I do that is because I had it once on a very intricate design where I didn't quite seal it properly. Like, I guess the saran wrap wasn't tight enough, and I had like a little bubble, and the paint got into it, and it got onto the bottom part of my design where it wasn't supposed to, and it wasn't sealed with epoxy, and I had to like basically restart the tumbler, and I was pretty upset about that. So I've never let myself do that again, so I add that extra little precaution. You don't have to do that. You might be more capable than I am. I clearly am not the strongest with saran wrap. So that's basically where we are now. I can remove this painter's line as well. And you don't have to worry again about this line being completely perfect at this point, because we are going to be putting in those dividing bands. So now what I would do is I would take my weeding tool, and I use tweezers. It's just my weeding tool of choice, so use whatever you're most comfortable with, and very carefully being, careful not to scratch the tape. This is not the tool I usually use. The one I have is usually a little sharper, but it's in my office, not in my workshop. And you just kind of peel off your stencil, revealing your design underneath. So just like that. And you are just going to go through, and with your favorite music or TV show or anything to help keep your sanity, you will remove every single little piece of vinyl. Again, I say be careful. If you need to, have a picture of what your design looks like so you know where to look for it. I don't need to with this. I can see, it's just the black, but depending on the paint you use, you might have a hard time seeing where you need to lift, or even, your vision. Some people can see things easier than other people can. So if you need to, have a picture of the design with you so you know how to, or where you should be looking for the next part to weed back. And just go to town with it. So I'm not going to do this on camera because this would be the longest tutorial in history if I did. So I'm going to stop recording now, and I will show you what I do after I have removed all of the vinyl from not one, but 2 tumblers. Okay, so all of my vinyl has been pulled. It is now ready for my next step. So before I lay down my bands to separate my different sections of the tumbler, I want to make sure that I have sealed the spray paint, because the last thing I want to have happen is laying down a band, it's not quite straight, pulling it back up, and then having the paint lift off with it. Just things have happened in the past with other tumblers, and it's just not a risk that I want to take. Also, I use this opportunity to add just a little bit of bling into the epoxy, just to give this a little bit of a sparkle. You don't have to do that. Usually I would use an ultrafine glitter or something like that. I don't have one in these corresponding colors, so I've just used a small, tiny amount of the glitter that was already used on here to kind of color match it. And I'm just going to be applying a thin coat of epoxy to just the top section. The reason why I'm doing it just here is because I don't want to be building up too much epoxy on my entire tumbler. So I've just reused the tape. You can see here it had spray paint lines on it. One of the ways that you can stay a little bit frugal, just kind of reuse your tape whenever you can. So now I'm just going to, on the top section here, just add a small amount of blinged up epoxy. All right, so in about 5 minutes, I'm going to torch this tumbler to get rid of any bubbles. I will pull my tape, and I'm just going to let this continue to spin and cure, and then we will be ready to add our bands. And if you're going to be adding a name personalization, we're going to do that in the next step as well. All right, so our next step is going to be to add the bands. So I do have this saved as a file as well, but I'm going to remake it here so you guys can kind of see how you might want to do it yourself. So when I am starting with the 30 ounce, the first band that I like to do, because I'm doing triple band, you don't have to, you can do single, double, triple, whatever you want. I'm going to be doing the triple band. It's what I like. I usually do black, then teal, then black again for the teal cup, and I'll be doing black, then purple, then black again for the purple tumbler. So if we remember before, my starting measurement around the tumbler on the top part was about 10 inches. Now these do taper down, so 10 inches is going to be too long for these. I actually like to have them a little bit too long because I just cut them down to size when I'm applying. It makes it a little bit easier for me. But if you want, you can take your fabric tape measure, wrap around, and you can figure out how wide your cup is at that area and make your bands based on that. So we're going to get started here by going back into design space and starting with a square shape. My internet seems to be just a little bit slow today, so hopefully it can keep up with me. So I'm going to start by unlocking my button here. You could have chosen the unlock button here as well. And I'm going to do my width at 10 inches. Get rid of that. So for my height, like I said, I like to start at about 1/4 of an inch. So that's going to be 0.25 inches. And I'm going to make it black. So then that way I kind of know what it is that I'm working with here. And I'm just going to duplicate this, and I'm going to duplicate it 3 times so I have a total of 4 bands. And the reason for that is because I've got 2 cups and they're going to have a top band and a bottom band. So I know that I need to have 4. Usually if you're just doing one tumbler, you just need the 2 bands. So now I'm going to take these bad boys again. I'm going to take all of them and I'm going to duplicate them. And actually, no, I'm going to undo that. I am just going to take 1, or at least delete these here, and then I'm going to take the one that I have here. So what I like to do when I'm layering my bands is I like to make it about 1/16 of an inch smaller in height than what it was here. So if you kind of go into your calculator, you kind of see that I did the measurement here. So 1 divided by 16 equals 0.0625. So I can take hold on, I can take 0.25 minus 0.0625, and that would give me 1.875. I'm just going to round that to 0.19. So I'm going to have to unlock it again, and my height is going to be 0.19. And, oops, sorry, 0.19. That's correct, not 0.019. Okay, and then for this here, I am going to duplicate it again 3 times. I'm going to align it center. I'm going to take my top 2 and I'm going to make those ones just a blue to represent the teal tumbler. And I'm going to take this one and I'm just going to make it a purple to represent the purple tumbler. And then that's where we are. So now, if we look here, it still says that they're 10 inches, but when you kind of look, if I were to line these up all sort of centered horizontally, it does look shorter. I don't know why Design Space is doing that. I don't know if it'll do it for you too. It's not. It will cut the right 10 inches. I really don't know why it's doing that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of these, I'm going to duplicate it again, I'm going to move it down here, and I want this to be, again, a 1/16 of an inch smaller. So I had here 0.1875, I'm going to subtract again a 1/16, which is 0.0625, and that will bring me down to 0.125 inches. So I'm just going to round it to 0.13. So again, I'm going to unlock that. So I keep this one 10 inches and 0.13. And that's going to be my smallest band here. And I'm going to duplicate this 3 more times again. Take these. You don't have to align it. I just like a nice looking artboard. And I'm going to leave these black. So these ones here are all going to cut together. I'm not going to attach these or anything like that because for this simple design or shape, the mat will put these as close as possible and make it, it's going to use less vinyl by doing that. So that's not going to be a problem for me at all. So now I would just go ahead and I would make it in these colors. If you're going to be adding if you're going to be adding names to this as well, then now would be the time that you would do add your names and cut them for this as well. So I'm just going to cut these and then I'm going to show you how I lay it. So you're going to notice that it's kind of dull right now, and that's because before you're going to be applying your vinyl, you're just going to do a light sand just to sort of scuff up your epoxy. You're going to wash it with Dawn dish soap, you're going to let it dry, and then you can add your decals. So I've already added my names onto these ones because they did ask for personalizations, and now I'm ready to add my bands. So I'm going to put my first, like my starting point of my band, I guess on what would be classified as the back of the tumbler. So I'm going to choose, maybe it's going to be my back. Yeah, maybe right here is going to be my back. And I'm going to be starting with the black vinyl. Let's move some things out of the way. So I don't leave it on my paper. I don't use transfer tape. I just peel it right off. And then I start by putting it, kind of try to figure out the middle part between the two sections that are being sort of covered here, sort of brought together by these bands. And I do try to make that starting line pretty straight. And when you're doing this, you don't want to be pulling too hard because this stuff is very flexible and you will start to stretch it. But you don't want it to be too slack either, because then you're going to start having issues with bubbles or with it not laying well. So you're going to just kind of start bringing it around. You can lift it and realign it as needed. God, this is really difficult for me to do kind of from a distance. Like, I usually have to get in close to sort of see what I'm doing. But I'm going to do my best here to kind of show you guys. Now, the nice thing with using this kind of vinyl is that you don't get issues so much with bubbles, but again, because it's flexible, you can stretch it a lot easier if you're pulling too tight on it. When you're using the foil vinyls, a lot of people, including myself, have issues where the vinyl kind of like bubbles or puckers up, especially on a taper cup. It doesn't have to be a lot of, sort of like a wide band to sort of start having, because the foil vinyls aren't flexible, to sort of start having them bubble. So, oops, just dropped it. So you kind of want to just sort of be aware of the materials that you're using. I do like to use the foil bands. I will use the foil bands from time to time. But they're a little bit more difficult to work with in that they do kind of have that issue with bubbling. So I find that when I'm laying my foil band down, I really am immediately following behind with my thumb to like kind of press it down as I go. Now, when I'm looking at this, I kind of looped down a little bit here, so I'm going to go back to this point. I'm just going to lift it back to this point here and kind of try to get that straighter without looping it down. looks better. If you don't have, if you have like an edge here still between your two sections, you're gonna need to epoxy that until it's smooth. That probably should have been something I mentioned earlier, because you will see it if there's a divot or an issue. So there we go. So that looks a lot better now. So as you can see, I cut it too long. So what I do is I just sort of can feel here with my fingernail, and then I can kind of see where that crease is, where the two portions of the vinyl meet. And I'm just going to bring it back, peel it back ever so slightly, bring my scissors in, cut it, and then push it down. And that is how I do that. Now, before I start layering this vinyl, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay down the bottom band. The reason for that is because if as I'm laying the bottom vinyl, I notice that, you know, it kind of isn't straight, or at least an acceptable level of straight here. Sometimes what happens is I don't really see it like this, but then I lay the bottom one and the bottom one's pretty straight, and then I kind of realize, oh no, this isn't really straight enough. And then I want to go in and fix that. It's a lot easier to do that before you lay the rest of your vinyl bands on top of it. So it's just when I'm laying the first. After this, I can use this as a guide for my next two, but when I'm laying the first, I want to lay the top one and the bottom bands first, and then I can start layering those vinyl pieces. So I'm going to do the other one off camera so I can get in a little closer and sort of look at it, but it's going to be the exact same process. I laid my bottom band, and I made sure that where they're lined up is pretty even. Now, these are handmade, so don't, you know, like kill yourself trying to make it perfect. There's going to be a little bit of play in your line. That's going to be okay. It's not going to be the end of the world. And I find that when I start adding the other bands, if I add them pretty straight to the bottom bands, it actually kind of becomes less noticeable. But if you are just doing the one single band, then that's it. You're done. That's all you have to do. If you're not, you're going to keep going. So I line up kind of as close as I can, not perfectly, but I kind of line up the back so that it's at the same spot. And I'm always going to overlap on the same seam. I want to have just the one seam, not multiple seams. So this is going to be done in very much the same style. The difference is it's a little bit easier now because I have a line that I can follow that I'm looking at directly. So I'm going to put this down sort of starting right at that seam, and just as before, I'm going to pull my vinyl kind of tight. I'm going to try to make it as straight as I can, and I'm just going to go around my tumbler, kind of following it with my thumb in behind. Keeping it tight, but not tugging too hard so I'm not stretching it out. Because if you start to stretch it out, what ends up happening is it starts getting thinner. And if you've just got a little stretch, it's not a big deal, but you stretch it far enough and you're going to notice it. So we are getting there. And then your most important part is going to kind of be lining it up to this part here so that it's not off center. You really want that to be about the same. And then again, I'll just pull it back just a little bit. Take my scissors, clip it, lay it down. So I will probably do the same on the bottom, but if you want to, it's up to you. You can add the top black band now. But I'm going to do the purple first and then move on to the next band. And now to add my final band. Again, totally optional. If you just wanted to do the two bands, you can stop right here. The thinner your vinyl goes, the easier it is to stretch it when you're pulling it tight. So just sort of be aware of that. So you can kind of see that I'm following behind it with my thumb and just giving it a little bit of pressure just to make sure that it's laying flat. Top band is done. All right, so there it is. It's banded now. Kind of ties the design together nicely. I do add my business information, like my logo and my care instructions, to the bottom of my tumblers. So that would be my next step, would be to pop this on. And now this is ready to just be epoxied until smooth, and then it is done.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, it would be greatly appreciated if you would like and share it. Also, if you're a fan of the channel, please be sure to subscribe and tickle that little notification bell so you'll be alerted to future videos I post. Thanks again for watching, and I'll be back soon with more Tumbler tips and tutorials.